Welcome back to Straight Facts by Dinar Investor.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not a financial advisor, nor am I a fiduciary. Many of you have reached out to me that have invested in cloud. You've shared how it's doing, and I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. A lot of you have invested in it, and it's starting to do well for you on the gains and rewards. That's awesome. If you guys can't, first off, notice how, I want to stress this, notice how no one is complaining about it. To many of you who thought it might be a scam and it could be this, notice how those who have invested in it, absolutely no one's complaining about it. That should tell you something, okay? And second, I myself have transferred crypto into it. I've transferred crypto out of it. I've also, using a BitPay Visa I've also converted it back into US dollars from cryptocurrency. So it's done everything for me, okay? So I want to stress that to you. I would ask those of you that are utilizing it and you're seeing rewards and gains, please take the time to share your thoughts and comments on the channel with everyone so they can kind of hear external, feedback on it. So, and if anybody else would like to sign up for it and utilize it, there's two ways to earn rewards. You can invest in cryptocurrency and see gains and rewards at that level, or you can also add referrals to it, but you don't have to add referrals. And also, guys, you can invest as little as $50 and just beta test it with $50. You'll see probably just a few cents a day in returns and gains. Okay, but you can also invest more. It's up to you how much you want to put in. Below the video, I will put my user ID, my referral ID if you want to sign up. I'll also have some instructions on how to utilize it. And my email address will be down there as well. And also, there's another gentleman by the name of Gary C. who he has his own YouTube channel. He's put some very informative information about cloud on his YouTube channel. I've got a link for him below. And also, guys, I'm more than willing to help you. It's a team effort. You guys have supported me and helped me. I'm going to reciprocate back and help you. If you guys need help with referrals, you want to do 3-way phone conversations, email me. Okay, I'm actually working with some of you guys right now doing, conference calls to help your friends understand it better. So, anyway, guys, just want to share that with you. Hope you have an amazing day. And here's your news. The news talks about an anti-Iran uprising within Iraq.
The New York Times: Iraq is rising against the hateful Iranian occupation. November 5, 2019. Baghdad News. The New York Times for the first time described the large-scale Iraqi demonstrations as being against the obnoxious Iranian occupation to dominate the joints of the Iraqi state. She revealed that the Iraqi army rejects a request to storm the building of the Turkish restaurant for fear of bloodshed. Report this ad. In detail, the paper says the protests began quietly a month or so ago with sporadic protests. It expanded steadily until last week as more than 200,000 Iraqis marched in Baghdad in the largest demonstration in Iraq's modern history, protesting against the Iraqi government and a foreign occupier, this time Iran, not America. The protesters have directed their anger against Iran, which they now see as having considerable influence inside their country, and are screaming against Iraqi parties linked to Iran. They shout slogans "Free Baghdad, Free Iran" by land. This scream spread in the streets and in the squares of the Iraqi capital, in the city of Karbala and in the back alleys and university corridors. These protests have turned into a struggle over who will shape the future of the country. Iraq, along with Lebanon, is a country dominated by Iran and is part of a growing revolt against Iran that is trying to demonstrate its power throughout the Middle East. The revolution is not anti-American, it is anti-Iran, anti-religious, anti-politics, says Saud Iskander, the former head of Iraq's National Archives. He adds that the protesters are tired of corruption and militias linked to Iran, some of which have developed into a huge mafia. This is more than that. Revolution has a social dimension, a conflict between generations. While Iran is the direct target of protesters' anger, the battle is even greater. It is a conflict between Iraqi youth and an older and more cautious generation, and between a political elite and a rising regiment that refuses to lead them. Report this ad. It is, above all, a conflict between those who have benefited immensely since the U.S. invasion that toppled Saddam Hussein, and those who struggle to get crumbs and angrily monitor the distribution of political parties with ties to Iran, positions, jobs and rewards to those close to them. The system, which was implemented after the 2003 invasion, despite being drafted by Iraqis and empowered by Americans, has devoted a system to dividing political power along religious and ethnic lines. Iran has taken advantage of that framework, using it to reflect it in Iraqi politics. As the United States withdrew from Iraq after 2009, Iranian-linked parties expanded their networks within the government. In 2014, Iran took advantage of the war on ISIS, helped form militias to fight ISIS, and by 2018 it became so powerful that Iran's political parties became dominant in the government. Report this ad. It was Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, head of the Quds Force, who brokered the deal that created the current government, the paper said. At the same time, at the grassroots level and among the country's youth, there was a growing feeling that Iran was benefiting and expanding at the expense of Iraq, becoming part of the political background of the protests. All our budget goes to Iran to support the IRGC, said Ali Jassim, a construction worker. All ministries and civilian facilities in Iraq run by Iran. We want to get rid of this government. We want the return of our country. Our parents were telling us to shut up. The walls have ears, said Muhammad Al-Amin, a second-year medical student who worked at a first aid center. But now we have the internet. We have traveled. We can see what the world looks like. We want a different life. We want to be like other countries. We want our rights. Demonstrators' demands to get rid of corruption, put an end to political parties, and create a presidential rather than a parliamentary system seem reasonable at the same time and almost impossible to achieve, at least, not without bloodshed. Report this ad. This is also difficult to achieve because protesters are increasingly demanding immediate results, as if they wanted to see lawmakers and ministers packing up their bags, getting rid of their characteristic villas in the green zone and completely disappearing. Those politicians who want to work with the protesters realize that the fundamental changes they are demanding, such as new election laws and an eventual new constitution, cannot be achieved overnight. Yet the political class style frustrates protesters who are impatient to see the changes begin now. Iraqi President Barham Saleh is trying to take steps in this direction by introducing legislation that would eliminate the current system of party lists and allow voters to vote for individual candidates. But in essence, it asks Parliament to adopt a system that costs many of its members seats. There is the political level, the street and the security establishment, says Maria Fantaby, senior Iraq analyst at the International Crisis Group. Protesters, for example, celebrate a sense of freedom and feel empowered through the momentum they created. It's not just young males, but for the first time young females and other factions in society, she said. She added that the protesters do not look at what may be the ultimate goal, they celebrate that they created this huge protest movement. Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi has been criticized for allowing security forces to try to suppress protests by force. During the first week of October, about 150 protesters were killed, most of them shot, and about 5,500 people were injured, including more than 1,000 members of the security forces, according to a government investigation. This error attracted tens of thousands of people to the protests. Rallies in the range of 20,000 to 25,000 have exploded across the country to nearly 200,000 in the capital. Violence erupted again on Monday, when security forces opened fire on demonstrators as they sought to cross the Al-Arar bridge in Baghdad, killing at least 5 people. Steps swallowed by corruption. The Prime Minister, despite much criticism, has taken steps to improve the lives of Iraqis, expand and supply electricity, improve relations with Iraqi Kurds and remove the walls that have divided Baghdad. But he is still a weak leader who owes his position to a political agreement drafted by Iran. Report this ad. So, while Mahdi was able to appoint technocrats in the ministries of electricity and oil, Iran's affiliated parties control at least 5 key ministries, including the ministries of Interior, Communications, Labor, and Social Affairs. Corruption is now endemic, and it exists even in those ministries that are seen as well managed. I graduated in engineering, but when I applied for a job at the oil ministry, they asked for $7,500, said 30-year-old Mohammed Fadl. The security forces are divided between lower-ranking and senior officers and between the Ministry of Defense and those in the Interior Ministry, which has brigades close to Iran. These divisions have led to disagreements among security entities over how to confront the demonstrators, who seized a building looming over the Republic Bridge. The army refused to approve a plan to cleanse the building, Turkish restaurant, where army officers feared more bloodshed that would provoke greater protests. There is no need to create this big problem, said a senior military official, speaking of the proposed plan to storm the building. Suddenly, Iraqi news channels announced at midnight on Monday that the government had shut down the internet. There was no explanation, but officials also closed it in early October, when they thought the protests were spiraling out of control. Although the government has gradually restored internet service, social media services including Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp have been banned for the duration of the protests. It remains unclear when the demonstrators will remain on the streets. For those who go every day with flags around their necks, such as Abu Jamal, 40, a baker, the answer is, I can pretend for a day, 2 days, a week, a year or 500 years. Root on November 4th. Iranian embassy set ablaze in Karbala. Anti-Iran sentiment appears to be growing in Iraq after a group of protesters set the Iranian consulate ablaze in the holy city of Karbala, southern Iraq on Sunday evening. The consulate was targeted one day before the 40th anniversary of the takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. A large crowd formed around the consulate as protesters hurled burning objects at its outer walls. In video footage, protesters could be heard chanting, "With our blood and souls, we will redeem you, Iraq." They then scaled the walls and replaced consulate's Iranian flag with that of Iraq. Part of the building was then set alight. U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday retweeted 2 videos from Saudi-funded newspapers that showed footage of the event. The Iraqi High Commission for Human Rights, IHCHR, reported 3 dead and 12 injured in clashes with security forces. Talib, 28, was one of the protesters outside the consulate. He told Reuters English that the aim was to send a message to Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei that Iraqis want to decide on their fate by themselves, and not by Tehran. "We want a pure Iraqi government that does not include the current politicians and leaders, because they are all under the command of Tehran," Talib said. "We want to decide on our prime minister or president, not Tehran or Washington," he added. Iraq's foreign ministry condemned the attack in a Monday tweet. The foreign ministry condemns the recent attack on the consulate of the Islamic Republic of Iran in Holy Karbala province. "Any attacks on the consulates and embassies in Iraq are a red line for us," the statement reads. They also stated that such attacks on the Iranian consulate will not affect the Iraqi-Iranian relations. There has been no response from Iran so far. The event follows tweets by Khomeini that suggested the protests were the product of a foreign conspiracy. On Wednesday, Khomeini warned both Iraq and Lebanon that insecurity and turmoil had been created by the U.S., the Zionist regime, some Western countries, and the money of some reactionary countries. He also warned both countries that the biggest damage enemies can inflict on a country is to deprive them of security, as they are doing today in some countries in the region. However, protesters on Iraq's streets are wary of Iranian influence in their country, accusing Iran of interfering in Iraq's internal affairs. Anti-Iran banners have been a regular fixture in the countrywide protests. Protesters in Tahrir Square in Baghdad have been seen burning the Iranian flag, while in Babel protesters painted the flag on the ground before stomping on it. Video footage circulated on Telegram also showed protesters in Diwaniyah province tearing and hitting images of Ayatollah Khamenei, founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The increase in anti-Iran slogans in Iraq during the protests has pushed the Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF, also known as Hashd al-Shabi in Arabic, to revise its views on the nationwide protests in Iraq. Iranian-backed paramilitias and politicians in Iraq also labeled the protests as a foreign conspiracy that aimed to destabilize the country. Iraqis have protested a lack of services, corruption, and unemployment for years. However, burgeoning protests led by the country's youth were met with deadly force from Iraqi security forces, killing over 100 people in a week of protest beginning October 1st. Protests then entered a brief hiatus period, due to the Arbaeen pilgrimage undertaken by Iraq's Shiite Muslims. A second round of protests began on October 25th. Iraqi demands grew to include a full overthrow of the government, constitutional amendments, and a new electoral law, among other demands for deep-rooted, systematic change. According to the Iraqi High Commission for Human Rights, at least 257 people have been killed, and more than 10,000 wounded, since protests began.